The gig is not a novelty. The history of working class in Brazil is a history of a gig economy.
Hello and welcome to Tech Won't Save Us. I'm your host, Marx, and today my guest is Rafael Grohmann. Rafael is a professor at Unicinos in Brazil, the coordinator of the DigiLabor Research Lab, and a principal investigator with the Fair Work Project in Brazil. In this conversation, Rafael fills us in on the conditions and organizing of food delivery workers, ride-hail workers, and even click farm workers in Brazil. I feel like Rafael makes a good point that when we talk about the gig economy, that frame of reference doesn't really fit in the global south in places like Brazil, where a lot of the working class is used to the kind of insecure work that we in the global north associate with, app-based work and these platforms, because we are used to, the employment contract being the way that most people experience work. But in a place like Brazil, where Rafael is based, that's not the case, and that kind of employment contract has never been as universal as it is in the global north. And so gig work has always been a thing, and now it just takes a different kind of form when it's on these platforms and apps. So I think this is a really fascinating conversation about what's been going on in Brazil, about the organizing and strikes that have been happening, and even about the ways that the platforms have tried to kind of push back and try to change the narrative in their favor in the face of the protests and strikes, and even the work that Fair Work has been doing to create a rating system for the platforms around minimum fair work standards. Tech Won't Save Us is part of the Harbinger Media Network, a group of left-wing podcasts that are made in Canada, and you can find out more about that at harbingermedianetwork.com. If you like this conversation, make sure to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and share it on social media or with any friends or colleagues who you think would learn from it. And this episode of the podcast, like every episode of Tech Won't Save Us, is free for everybody because listeners like you support the work that goes into making it every single week. If you like the show, if you feel like you learn from the show, you can join supporters like Spiegel Mix from Taipei and Alessandro Delfonte from Toronto by going to patreon.com/Tech Won't Save Us and becoming a supporter. Thanks so much and enjoy this week's conversation. Rafael, welcome to Tech Won't Save Us.
Hello, Paris. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to chat with you and to learn a bit more about what's been going on in the gig economy in Brazil. I think this is a topic that a lot of people probably won't be familiar with. So I am really looking forward to learning more and to finding out what has been going on down in your part of the world. And so I wanted to start by getting kind of an overview of what the gig economy looks like in Brazil and what it means for these workers. So can you start just by explaining, some of the companies that would be operating in Brazil and what it's like for the workers to work in this kind of sector of the economy, I guess?
First of all, your podcast is a reference for us in Brazil and for many critical scholars around the world. And I don't like the term gig economy because I think there is a translation thing about a gig in Brazil and other countries, because in Latin America, in Brazil and other countries from so-called global south, the gig is not a novelty. The history of working class in Brazil is a history of a gig economy. It's not a novelty. Before the emergence of digital platforms, before emergence of other digital technologies, because the standard employment is not a standard thing in the global south. And my first thoughts about this are Latin American and global south are exception. No, there is not an exception. Europe, UK, United States are the exception. The history of the economy is a big gig economy. So for us, the novelty is the subordination of digital platforms localized mainly in global north. The gig economy subsumed in this platform labor context. For example, for instance, the work of riders, of couriers are not a novelty. But now these people, these workers are subordinated and coordinated by digital platforms and platform companies around the world. And in Brazil, there is in this so-called gig economy, workers in the streets working for platforms, and on the other hand, workers in their homes in web-based platforms. And there are many platforms here. Workers on the streets, there are Uber and Didi, Brazilian version, Chinese platforms called 99. And there are two main ride-hailing platforms here. And the delivery sector, the leader is a Brazilian company in the strong and aggressive platform called iFood. It's very important call about iFood because this is a Brazilian company, a Brazilian platform with the Silicon Valley ideology in CEOs, discourses, in developments and policymakers. And very interesting around the world, but in Brazil too, that platforms have public policy sector in their companies and a mix of PR, and they saying what cities must to have around public policies. And iFood sells themselves and brands themselves disruption, citizenship, and innovation, and anti-discrimination. And now with our Fair Work project, the CEOs of this company is on the press and wrote, "We are fair work." Ooh. And it's very important to put the role of communication and media to platform labor around the world. But in Brazil, iFood has a central role on this. One example about this media strategies is that last year there was strong national strikes of delivery workers, and the social media of this platform said, "Unfair blocks no, delivery worker, we are on your side." And it's very interesting because the workers were against this platform, but social media said, "Oh, we are on your side." And in Brazil, it's very impressive the power of this company regarding control narratives and control public discourses. And this is the leader of the delivery sector here. And then there are Uber Eats, Happy. This is a Colombian platform based in Latin America. And this platform, you can choose anything. You can choose a food, you can choose a beer, you can choose another things. The people in Brazil made requests such as, okay, please go to university and assign my class presence. It's very interesting because Happy sell everything. And in the contract of Happy, they stated Happy does not have liability around transportation of drugs. This is the delivery sector and ride hailing sector in Brazil. And cloud work, I don't like these terms, cloud work and so on. I have many criticisms around this work, but there are also about 50 micro work platforms in Brazil with many workers working here. The Brazilian data show that we have about 11 million of workers depending on digital platforms to survive and to work, and 1 million of delivery workers, of couriers. And this is the scenario of Brazilian platform labor with many profiles of workers. For example, the profile of driver is white man around 30, 40 years, and the delivery worker is black people and younger riding with their bicycles. And with the pandemic situation, many people was unemployed, and the number of couriers increased in Brazil in the last year.
I think that is such a good overview of what is going on in Brazil. And, especially I want to emphasize that I take your point about, how the term gig economy in the way that we refer to it in the global north, specifically to mean work that happens, through these specific platforms, doesn't really make as much sense in the global south or in Brazil, where this kind of work is much more normal and is not just kind of an exception that comes with the entry of these platforms. So I think that is a really good thing to emphasize to the listeners, especially because, a lot of the listeners will be listening from the global north as well. So I think that's a really good point that you make there. You talked a lot about the workers who are in this sector. Maybe I should say the platform economy instead of the gig economy. And especially in the delivery side of things, there has been a lot of protest, I guess, and strike in recent years as these workers have been pushing back against these companies and trying to, I guess, improve the conditions of their work, improve their pay, things like that. Can you talk a bit about the movements of these kind of delivery workers and what they have been demanding from the government and from the companies to improve their conditions?
I just would like to add some things about the terms. I think that the terms and the concepts are not neutral. And I really like a piece from Nupur Raval around hidden labor and ghost work and the mistakes around the things, and how to talk about hidden labor is so Eurocentric and so global north. And the main thing is about micro work, because the work is always macro, because I work with my hands and with my head always. And I think the academic field around platform studies and platform labor, we have many challenges to name this phenomenon. It's very hard to name these things and to not fetishize and to not brand. It's my brand concept. It's a very complicated thing. But about the protest, the first thing is that workers are not unorganizable. Jamie Woodcock stated this, and Callum Kant, good friend of mine, and doing hard work in this thing. And I don't believe in algorithm panopticon or the total power of algorithm around workers. Fabian Ferrari and Mark Graham wrote a piece called Fissures in Algorithm Power, because the workers find ways to survive and many things in building emerging solidarities, building other forms of solidarity. And this is a quote from Cheryl Soriano and Jason Cabanis. And Cheryl Soriano and Jason Cabanis state that there are entrepreneurial solidarities. It's a contradiction around, on one hand, the building of these emerging solidarities, and the other hand, the strong presence of neoliberal ideology and entrepreneurial ideology. In Brazil, we have the same. This is not call the workers as entrepreneur, or saying that workers think themselves as entrepreneur, because they said, I say and I know that I'm not entrepreneur. But the entrepreneurial and neoliberal rationality in government and ideology have a strong presence in everyday practices and everyday movement in Brazil too. In last year, there was strong movements and national strike of Brazilian delivery workers in Brazil, in whole country in a big country. It's very difficult to organize these things. And the workers demand more safety, more health for workers, and a fair pay for workers, and reclaiming against unfair blocks, against unfair management of these platforms. Because on the one hand, platforms sell themselves innovators and disruptors and citizenship and anti-discrimination, but the workers know that is not a thing. And there was a central role of social media like WhatsApp. In Brazil, we have a strong presence of WhatsApp in everyday practices of many citizens here. It's a good note to do, because I know that in many parts of the world, WhatsApp is not a big thing. But in Brazil, WhatsApp is the default of internet from many people. And in Brazil, the people say that I don't have internet, I have WhatsApp, because Brazilian government and enterprises did contracts and so on, and people does not pay for data to use WhatsApp things. So the people use WhatsApp in many ways, and the Brazilian riders and other Brazilian workers organize through WhatsApp groups and sharing photos and videos and helping each other and competing against other two, like I had more pay than you, and so on. So the social media and communication through social media had a central role to organize riders from many parts of the country and to make the strategy of these strikes in last July of 2020. And interesting thing is that legacy media and traditional media, and also Twitter and social media, highlight the central role of a leader and build a leader of this protest. And he's interesting guy called Paulo Galo, a leader of anti-fascist Courrier in Brazil. And he say interesting things like, we are not entrepreneurs, we are workers. We have to learn with Paulo Freire things. And Paulo Freire is a hateful things from Bolsonaro supporters here and far right supporters. And he talked very well about the working class things and working class situation against fascism, against Bolsonaro, and so on. So legacy media represented Galo and anti-fascist Courrier as the leaders of these strikes. And Paulo Galo was a delivery worker, but was blocked and does not work more with these platforms. Okay, and we discovered in the day of the national strike in Twitter, many and most of mentions around the strikes was about anti-fascist Courrier and about Paulo Galo. And the international media highlights, whoa, the national strike was built by anti-fascist Courrier in Brazil, because national media and because Twitter highlights the central role of Paulo Galo and so on. But we, as researchers, saw that in WhatsApp groups, Galo was not a thing. Or the workers say, I'm not anti-fascist. I don't know what is anti-fascist. I want more pay, I want more safety. I don't mind about anti-fascist things. And we discovered around the time, Paulo Galo and Fascist Courrier has 6 delivery workers or 10 delivery workers or 20 delivery workers in Brazil, and there are not the main organizers. The main organizers was most normal people from working class and some delivery leaders in Brasilia and other cities around the country. But definitely Paulo Galo and anti-fascist Courrier are not the leaders of movement in Brazil. And we have a little confusion or a little of fight between these parts, the anti-fascist, because anti-fascist Corriere has a strong presence on social media, and they are very cool and very interesting, but they are not leaders. And I like it, and I like it other movements here. So this is about the national strikes 2020 in Brazil, but the workers have not gained this demand. And the Brazilian economy situation was more and more worse than last year. And so the movement, uh, since to 2020, the media don't represent and don't highlight the strikes of Brazilian delivery workers, but they are in movement. So in the last few months, Brazilian delivery workers from smaller cities, but not so small, but it's not in big capitals like São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, organized many strikes. One of the cities, São José dos Campos, is near of São Paulo, organized 6-day strike with help of other countries, and say to iFood the same demands around health, security, and more pay, and against unfair blocks, and how iFood and other platforms in Brazil block people who organize. They call about a discrete block. The platform never say you block because you strike with other workers, but in a day you block it, and that is. So the people in Brazil and the working people in Brazil are in process of organizing in other emerging forms of solidarity. But we have a complexity around the political composition of delivery workers in Brazil. And my final thing about this question is around the book from Callum Scant, Writing for Deliveroo. And it's very interesting that Callum said 7 times about Brazilian delivery workers in the UK. And the first quotes about Brazilians is about, whoa, Brazilians have the best tactics of strikes. Brazilians have in the WhatsApp groups from Brazilian that born the first strike in Brighton and so on. And this the last time he said, but Brazilian are Bolsonaro supporters in Brazil. So the political composition of delivery workers in Brazil are very complex. And it's about how these workers can organize themselves as workers, but supporting Bolsonaro. There is a thing, and other researchers, such as Rosana Pinheiro Machado, Brazilian that teaches in the UK, are researching now the relationship between Bolsonaro supporting and organizing delivery workers, and how these things occur in other countries such as Philippines and so on, and this relationship between authoritarianism and organizing workers.
That is so fascinating to learn about, all those aspects of, the organizing that is taking place in Brazil, but then also, what it looks like when Brazilian workers who are in another country are organizing as well. I think that gives us a really good insight into what is going on that aspect of delivery workers in Brazil, and the organizing they've been doing to try to improve their conditions, and how difficult that is because of the power of these companies. There's another aspect of this as well that I think is really important, and that you kind of touched on there. And that is, for the past 3 or 4 years, Jair Bolsonaro has been the president of Brazil. And during that time, there has also been this terrible pandemic that has hit Brazil really, really hard, in part because of Bolsonaro's, bad governing style. And so I'm wondering, what has the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro meant for these delivery workers? And I guess what the pandemic has meant for them as well.
Jair Bolsonaro has at least bad government here and around delivery workers and around other working class people in Brazil. The Brazilian government offered in the first year of pandemic a pay for low pay workers. But in the international media, Brazilian government say that the pay is very high and it's decent pay to Brazilian and to build welfare state and so on. But the things are very different and the payment are very, very low to Brazilian people. And many people unemployed was beginning to work on delivery sector or other sectors from delivery platforms. And in Brazilian government, there are about 30 or 35 bills. And we have a conservative deputies and senators and so on. And the most of these bills proposals are from conservative way and to deepen this sacrificial citizenship, a term from Wendy Brown, and to say, okay, let's deepen the flexibilization of workers and to say that they are real entrepreneurs in a more liberal way than secure the real and decent payment to workers. So the institutional politics in Brazil in the last few years is very complicated, and to talk about regulation of digital platforms here, it's very dangerous in the regressive context here. In the next year, there will be next general elections here, and the promise of Bolsonaro against Lula, and I don't know what we can expect, but I think the things will be better in the next year.
I certainly hope so. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with the general election. You work with the Fair Work Project, and that obviously puts out standards for these delivery companies and ride hailing companies and things like that, and how they should be treating workers to kind of rank them based on that. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing with Fair Work in Brazil and how platforms have responded to the attempts to kind of push them to improve their conditions, I guess?
We are scoring 6 platforms here from ride hailing, from delivery sector, and also general services like painter and other domestic work and so on. I can say that in Latin America, the Fair Work project is scoring many platforms. Now we are on Ecuador, Chile, Colombia, Paraguay, Argentina. And in Chile and Ecuador, we released 2 reports this year. And the best platform has 3 to 10 score. And I think this shows that in Latin America, the platform labor is a deep web of platform labor around the world. And realistically, that Fair Work has the minimum principles for fair work in digital platforms. Is not the revolution. It's the minimum principles regarding pay, regarding contracts, regarding work conditions, regarding management, and regarding representation. And the Brazilian and other in Latin America platforms does not match with these points regarding minimum wage and regarding fair contracts and so on. And the real challenge is how can push the platforms against these principles and to better and improve the work conditions from these fair work principles. It's our challenge, and I have a few words about that. and two gags, I think. The first is that the Brazilian and other, I think, Latin American CEOs has a strong Silicon Valley ideology and colonial ideology too. So it's very interesting because when I, Rafael, with my Brazilian university, emailed these platforms, I didn't have the answer. But I say to my Oxford colleagues, well, send an email with big Oxford logo to them in English. And they answered the email and they talked to us. It's a very colonial perspective about these things. But I think my main concern about this, it's very important to say to an international audience, is that in our process in Brazil, we discovered that two platforms searched for a think tank and a liberal think tank here, a managerial think tank here, to build an alternative fair work principles in a commitment letter from the platform side. And they want to release their commitment letter. At the same time, we will release our fair work ratings. And the CEOs of one of this platform wrote on the main newspaper in Brazil that iFood is very commitment with fair work, with decent work, and so on. So they are afraid that with a public image and media image around the world about unfair work from these platforms, they are afraid about that, and they want to build alternative fair work principles to guarantee that they are fair and they are cool and so on. This strong struggle regarding media, regarding narratives, and regarding how can we put the things in a minimum decent, minimum real things, that is our big challenge to do until the end of this year.
In that answer, you gave us a lot of important insight into, how the companies are thinking and how the companies are trying to push back on these ideas that you're trying to put out there, that Fair Work is trying to put out there about, like, even just minimum standards about what work should look like in this sector, right? And they are trying to push back and reframe the conversation to still suit themselves instead of helping the workers. But obviously, you have also written about how in Brazil there is also kind of a growing kind of platform cooperative movement to try to create alternatives to these platforms that are serving workers in a different way. So can you talk a little bit about platform cooperativism in Brazil and I guess what that looks like?
At the Digital Labor Research Lab, we launched in this year a platform co-op observatory in Portuguese to promote platform cooperativism in Brazil. My first thing is that I really like the term and the movement around platform co-op. And I understand and agree regarding their criticisms about Callum Kent or Marisol Sandoval about the limits or the perils of platform co-ops. So first of all, I think we can, from a Brazil side and Brazilian side, do a broader sense of platform co-op in a way that building worker-owned platforms and worker-owned technologies that say that it's not only co-ops, they can be collectives or other worker-owned institutional designs. And on the other hand, what is a platform? And the term platform can be an Eurocentric issue or a peril to reproduce techno-solutionist perspective to platform and service or so on. It's not a thing. So we can reframe this platform co-op. I think platform co-op is a useful brand because in Brazil, even in Brazil, this term is very strong. But I think we can move towards a broad sense of platform co-op. And in Brazil, we have emerging collectives of delivery workers. One of these, called Senoritas Courrier, is formed by women, couriers, and trans people building a collective without a platform. They have only automated form and circulating meanings around mobility and real diversity and decent work and other things. In Brazil, we have about 10 collectives or co-ops of workers here. And this theme of platform co-ops was emerged in media with the national strikes. And with the national strikes, the workers say, and even the anti-fascist Courrier, we have to do a co-op. But some workers negotiated with Coop Cycle in France, but in Brazil, many workers work through motorcycle is in not cycle. And for Coop Cycle, and I think it's a good thing, they agree with the mobility and the importance of cycle and not motorcycle for environmental issues. So the Brazilian has not agreed with co-op cycle, but on the other way, many of these co-ops and collectives of delivery workers are trying to build these own technologies, because Brazil have a strong movement of free software and free technologies, mainly in Lula governments. And I think we can relate delivery workers movement and free softwares and free technologies movement. And I think this can be a thing. In Argentina, delivery workers are with Coop Cycle and building platforms with Coop Cycle. But my thing, we must to build this technology from below, because there's not a thing to reproduce technologies from other side or for other people. And my principles around platform co-op is a mix about design justice and intercooperation and decent work. And I really like the work from Demons at the Open University of Catalonia, because they have a broader sense of platform co-ops regarding data co-ops and regarding data commons and other interesting issue. And I'm very inspired by that. Then is that disco co-op. I think this thing can be a mixed, interesting mix from Brazil. And my last example here is about homeless workers movement. And the homeless workers movement in Brazil have a technology sector offering courses of things and artificial intelligence with Paulo Freire pedagogy and with a left side. And they built a virtual assistant to connect militants and people searching for workers like painter and designer and domestic worker. And this virtual assistant called Hires Who Struggles. In Brazilian, contrate quem luta. And the name of virtual assistant is Leon, from Leon Trotsky and so on. And it's a very useful example about emerging worker-owned platforms. It's not only about platform co-ops. And my last thing, Rio, is that I think fair work can be useful to score platform co-ops and worker-owned platforms, because in the next 5 years, I don't know if there will useful score the same platforms and same platforms with score 2 and score 1 and so on. We have to put these minimal principles to help to build these platform co-ops and these worker on platforms like a basic principle to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, I think it's really interesting to hear how the homeless workers movement are also kind of developing their own technologies to suit their purposes and what's needed there as well. So I think that's really fascinating. I feel like I have learned a lot in our conversation. And so I wanted to end with one more question that is not so much on delivery workers, but another form of this kind of platform work or digital work or whatever you want to call it. And that is, you told me that there was a click farm strike recently in Brazil. And so I wonder if you could give us some insight into that, side of this kind of work, the click farms, and what actually happened with this strike.
First of all, we have in Brazil, there was about 50 micro work platforms regarding platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turk, App and Lionbridge, and so on, and global AI platform. And on the other hand, there was content moderation platforms from TikTok, Twitter, and so on. And we recently discovered click farm platforms in Brazil. There are about 5 or 6 platforms in Brazil. There are others in Latin America, but click farms is mainly in Latin America and Southeast Asia too. And there are Brazil-based platforms paying people to click, follow on Instagram. I call these platforms as parasite platforms because they depend on social media platforms, infrastructures, and parasite around workers too. The first thing is that the clients of these platforms are mainly influencers and politicians and celebrities. We discovered TV shows, presenters, and singers, and so on. And the people are paid less than 1 cent per task. And people, for survive purposes, people use more than one account and mainly fake accounts. And it's very interesting because the people hire these platforms to don't use bots because they want organic or real engagement on these platforms. But workers angry because it's very low pay, they outsource these tasks for bots and use bots and sharing the photos of bots saying, okay, now I am working with 200 of bots and 200 of accounts. And it's very interesting because the people are paid even to dislike on YouTube. And it's very interesting because it's not about, in Brazilian, the people say that Bolsonaro have hate room, but it's not a hate room of government. It's a hate factory floor in this click farm. In my colleague Jonathan Ong called about disinformation for hire and the role of click farming. So these people, mainly women, working for these click farm platforms from their homes with children, with cell phones of children, of husband, with many gadgets in the side. In the last year, the main platform here called in English earn on Instagram, earn money on Instagram. It's very interesting because the people discovered these platforms through YouTube channels saying earn more money, earn easy money, and so on. And these YouTubers channels offered courses, and Charles Soriano called this as skill makers. So, okay, these people learn to use these platforms, and in the last year, the main platforms earn money on Instagram, change the pay, and the minimum price decrease in 50%. And the people was very angry, and the people say they are calling us slaves or they are crazy. And with the help of YouTube cultures and cultures YouTube, they organize a strike of 2 days. And on YouTube, the YouTube coach is saying, we have to paralyze these parasites and know about our strike. And it's very interesting because these people are not represented through media, or I don't like the term invisible labor, but they are invisible on media, or even in Brazilian media. The people doesn't know about the presence. And my colleagues from communication and media department does not know that the influencer economy has a strong cost and so on. The people has this strike in March this year and discovered the cell phone of one of CEOs and say, bitch better have my money and say things like that. But the platform side is that many workers are blocked by Instagram. And when they are blocked, the people are not paid. And the clients are understanding that is not a real good job. But I think the click farm in Brazil is a deep web of platform labor here, and we have more work to do about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's really interesting to hear how, even on the YouTube channels, the people they were going to for coaching were saying like, okay, we need to have this 2-day strike. So people that know about it. Yeah, so that's really interesting. Rafael, I think you've given us so much to think about when it comes to this kind of work in Brazil and what things are looking like down there, how people are organizing. It's been great to chat with you about this and to learn more about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if you can subscribe to DigiLabor newsletter and DigiLabor website, we will organize a PhD symposium. You are very welcome. Thank you very much, Paris.
Rafael Grohmann is a professor at Unicinos, the coordinator of DigiLabor, and a principal investigator of the Fair Work Project. You can follow Rafael on Twitter at @Grohmann_Rafael. You can follow me at Paris Marx, and you can follow the show at Tech Won't Save Us. Tech Won't Save Us is part of the Harbinger Media Network, and you can find out more about that at harbingermedianetwork.com. And if you want to support the work that goes into making the show every week, you can go to patreon.com/techwon'tsaveus and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.